Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is the next part of the screencast presentation series for the comparing coverage from major news networks. We're going to go ahead and look at the two print sources first. And at this time, I would like for you to please copy down in your charts the talking points that I provided here for you from what we really should have gotten from reading those two sources and using our media skills and literacy skills that we learned so far in this unit when it comes to understanding bias and comparing sources. Let's go and get started with the first set of sources for print media, talking, of course, about the CNN source right now. So this source was titled Six Takeaways from Trump's Impeachment Trial. The main point of this article was pretty simple. It was that former President Donald Trump's second impeachment trial did take place, and it made history, but of course not in a good way. The precedents that was set by the former president, CNN would argue, were bad for the future, and we're going to talk about that now with some subpoints. So in the actual article, they broke it down relatively easy into different subsections. First off, they say when Democrats were offered an opening to hear more witnesses, they essentially let Trump off the hook. You see, some Democrats especially wanted more witnesses to essentially hear from, which might deter the outcome. However, other people feared that this would drag on the trial, so they just voted instead, knowing full well that they probably wouldn't have the supermajority votes needed to convict the former president. Now, additionally here, CNN also states that even in the midst of being acquitted, the Republican Party is still Trump's party. What they basically mean by this is that Trump has still a strong hold of the reins of the party and the people in it, especially in Congress, especially Senate and House leaders. They also mention here that a Twitterless Trump is much quieter force. What they meant by that was basically with Trump being banned from Twitter and social media, this, of course, opens up an air of mystery. We don't know how he's feeling unless he makes formal statements through his office of the former presidency in his home in Florida. So, of course, that might affect the overall dialogue here as well. The article is quick to point out that Republican women who voted to convict Trump should be lauded as heroes, as many women did speak up against the former president. CNN is basically saying that they should be honored and not admonished by the party and by Americans. But they did say that one person who deserves to be admonished and possibly have to stand against is Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. You see, Mitch McConnell, according to the reading and the events, voted to acquit Trump, but he did say in a controversial quote that Trump still had direct involvement for the riotous mob. But at the end, CNN wraps up their piece by saying this is not the end of the story, as the riot will still be in the public eye and the public memory for a long time to come. And additionally, they say that rioters are still being prosecuted across the courts of the land for their actions on January 6th. And they even open up the doors of possibility to say that Donald Trump could run again. And so these types of talking points, I think, lead one to believe that this is a piece that was meant to not only inform in their point of view, but also maybe think about the future. So let's go ahead and get to the next part here in our chart and talk about buzzwords. So from my reading here, I identified a few buzzwords that were pretty clear cut. Let Trump off. Wedge between Republicans. Abhorred by Trump's behavior. Shocking new details. Of course, that's referring to the new witnesses and the accounts that they had that could have changed the trial. Convicting Trump would be a high bar. Dispatch a riotous mob. Post-election exile in Mar-a-Lago. So they're referring to the status of Trump right now, post-presidency. They keep the riot in the public eye. So once again, I think it's pretty clear that those buzzwords might lead one to believe that there is some bias here, very much so. Analysis. Was this good? Was it bad? Well, here's my personal opinion, and you are welcome to write down what I say or disagree. That's fine, as long as you state your opinions with evidence. I think the source focused on a variety of different factors surrounding the impeachment. They talked about the leading events to it, the aftermath, and, of course, the drama during it. The source did break it down into a pretty clear-cut structure format, which is great. I like when things are split up and there's big headings and you can follow things in order from piece to piece. The source talked about, like I said before, the background, the current events of it all, and of course the prospective future. And the points provided show little quotes, however, from political leaders. So I think that this piece maybe could have done a little bit more to include whole quotes from whole politicians who were part of this process, and that might have helped with its legitimacy in the public eye. The points offered here in this piece also do not mention the Biden administration's stance on the impeachment proceedings. Since Joe Biden is the president, I think it might have been helpful for them to maybe kind of sort of say why they think the Biden administration would take a certain stance on this and what they might encourage. And also, this piece seemed to vilify Trump more than anything. If you look at some of the word choice used, I think it's pretty clear that it's not really a fair portrayal of the former president of the United States. So once again, I think that even though they might have attempted to tap into his mindset and use his words, the fact is they could have done a little bit better in being a little bit more fair and balanced to the former president, and in the midst that he was in fact acquitted. And of course, the future is probably bright for him. Okay, so let's go ahead and get on to the next part here, the Fox News reading that we just did in the previous screencast. Let's go ahead and dissect that one right now. So this article was entitled Trump Acquitted in Second Impeachment Trial on the Charge of Inciting January 6th Riot. Okay, here we go. So the main point here of this was pretty much similar to the last one, in that Trump was acquitted in a historic second impeachment trial for president. This event has huge impacts for time to come. You're probably going to get a different feel while you type that down of this particular type of piece, in the sense that their overall review was not as glaring and negative as, of course, the CNN piece. Let's go and get started. Subpoints. Number one, the House managers themselves presented a pretty feasible case of Trump's infringement of the law. And coming from Fox News here, that does mean something. So they are, of course, owning up to the fact that the House impeachment managers, who were predominantly Democrat, did a pretty good job of holding their own. But they also say here that Trump's legal team did their thing. They did a respectable job defending their client, who was, in fact, the former president, Trump. They also mentioned the fact that when the vote actually happened, many GOP leaders did vote to convict, so they don't skirt around that truth, but they do mention the specific names of the specific senators, which I thought was smart. And they, of course, put the part of the reading in here that Trump was celebrating his acquittal, and they talk about that this foreshadows his possible potential political future. They also, of course, talk about Mitch McConnell, who did vote to acquit Trump, but blamed Trump directly for the violence. And of course, if you're a Fox News viewer at home and you're reading this or seeing this, this might have a different impact for you than, say, a typical CNN viewer from their publication. They also say here that the Senate had a chance to call witnesses, but they didn't. And this would have been a last-minute decision that could have had bad ramifications on the trial. This could have extended it for way, way, way longer than what people might have wanted. Now, as far as buzzwords here, some things that stuck out to me, and maybe they did to you, are as follows. The number fell short of a supermajority needed to convict. So they're basically saying here that the number fell way short of what they needed to actually have this to be a legitimate conviction. They also had this phrase in here, open the door to another White House run. Of course, they're referring to Trump, and I'm sure if you're a Fox News reader or viewer, you might find favor with this. Greatest witch hunt in history. Of course, they use this quote here from the former president to describe his take on all the impeachment proceedings that happened. Fox News does say that this is the shortest impeachment in history, which might lead one to believe that this was haphazardly put together or presented. They do include quotes from the rioters, which I think is helpful for their objectivity. They say things like, hey, Mike Pence, which of course is really graphic to think about. Fight like hell is a direct quote from the president. Political speech is protected by the First Amendment. So including this in here is actually really influential, because they're basically saying how, whether or not you like the words of the former president on that day, he does have free speech. The team showed a video of nearly every Democrat using fighting words in the past. Of course, you didn't hear that from CNN, but you would find it, of course, on Fox News. They basically talked about Trump's legal team making a clever edited video, which did in fact show over the past 4 years, prominent Democrats using the words fight. And I think the last part here that they mentioned is that the vote capped a wild Saturday in Washington with numerous plot twists. I mean, this whole phrase in general is pretty loaded and pretty biased. And, you can pretty much get that feel from just looking at it and reading it. Okay, analysis. Was this source good? Was it bad after what we read and after what we kind of deduced so far? Well, this piece was formatted into short and contrite segments separated by themes, so I thought that was good. They used their paragraph pretty well. And of course, that makes it easy to follow and easy to read. I think more readers might benefit from short paragraphs in nature. The piece also included pictures of the different people that were being mentioned and also the different events. They included pictures of the rioters, pictures of McConnell, I think a picture of one of the House impeachment managers. They even included quotes from Trump that were longer in nature and other key people too, like the Democrats and Trump's legal team. And of course, quotes can be powerful when they're presented correctly and not used as just mere sound bites. They talk about events leading to a call for more witnesses. So I think that was good. They were trying to bridge that gap there, which makes sense. Because I think a lot of Americans who were watching on Saturday a few weeks ago were a little bit confused. They might have been, wait, why are there more people being called? How does this work? And they also covered the drama from different people, from Trump to McConnell to Schumer to Pelosi. And so I thought that this was helpful for this piece to talk about the complicated web of relationships between different leading politicians at the time. And I thought it was also helpful that the piece included all the names of the senators who voted to convict Trump. Because once again, if you're a Fox News reader or viewer, you might base your votes differently in the future if you know who vowed to convict your president, especially if you side with them. And also, this piece did not overly cover or justify Trump's actions or the rioters, which is good. So I do think it's good that this piece did give pretty fair and balanced information. Although, if you noticed, if you read between the lines here, they do talk about the fact that he was acquitted more than the fact that he was actually breaking history, being impeached twice. Obviously, one has a more positive connotation. Being acquitted means essentially you're not being held guilty or found guilty. So, of course, that has a more of a positive connotation. So you would find the word acquitted presented more in this reading than in the other one, obviously. So, guys, as you can see from my talking points, hope you found this to be incredibly helpful and hope you found this to be incredibly insightful as, once again, we seek to identify more forms of bias and different forms of coverage of news networks on news topics. Please proceed to the next screencast, which analyzes the two videos that you watched on your own.